I'm Matt Brittin, very excited to be opening up the second half of our agenda this afternoon. And I've been asked to talk about the question, how can the UK produce the next global innovation leader? And I think this question is code for why isn't Google or Skype or Facebook British? And I don't know. I think it's probably a failure on my part and Dan and the rest of our countrymen. But I thought rather than try to answer that question, I'd introduce two friends who are going to help us to think about it. And I'm delighted that we can introduce two great guests on this topic. So we've got Eric van der Key here, who is a tech entrepreneur with 25 years' experience. He is now the entrepreneur in residence for the UK government. That's quite something. He helped to establish the UK's global entrepreneur programme. And he is now CEO of TechCity investment organisation. So we want to find out what is going on in the East End at the Silicon Roundabout. But before we do that, and first I'm going to ask Dr. Klaus Hommels to share his view with us. Now, many of you will know Klaus and what he's been doing. He's one of Europe's leading business angels. Numerous successful investments, just a few of them, just a selection including QXL, Skype, Facebook, Stardoll, Spotify. I could go on. This guy knows a bit about where growth comes from and where innovation comes from. Klaus is ex-Bertelsmann, AOL, Apax, and Benchmark Capital. But of course, now he's got his own fund, Hommels Holdings. So, Klaus, could I ask you to start? Why haven't we got a British Google, Facebook, etc.?
Well, I think it is basically because our home market is too big to be big and too small to be big. So that everybody, and you share this this fate with Germany and France and Spain as well, that every entrepreneur thinks he develops for the home market. And with this default setting, you're never going to be big. So whereas all the companies were originating out of Europe that became big are from smaller countries, like the Rovios in Finland, like the Skypes and Spotifys in Sweden. So they don't even think about developing for the home market and start with a different scaling and gearing regarding their idea. So I think that is the prevailing reason.
So we're living in the wrong countries?
Yes, I guess so.
That's good. That's good. But it's not just a UK problem. It's also Germany, France, and elsewhere in Europe.
Yes, and I think there are some points which you can tackle. So I think when we more generally just talk about it, then we have to say, what is the ecosystem and how did it develop? And the ecosystem for me is about hubs, because everywhere where you have a very strong hub, like Israel or Silicon Valley, you have innovation and you have an ecosystem. So I think with Berlin and with London, Europe has these hubs, but especially Berlin has caught up a lot, and Stockholm. So secondly, the second-time entrepreneurs. I think some of the big companies that have developed are clearly made by second-time entrepreneurs. So that is a DNA that the US had for years. We didn't have that. So it's starting. And the most important thing for me is the financing markets. Europe doesn't have exit markets. And exits create admiration, so people want to also follow these entrepreneurs. To give an example, in the US, the total listed internet companies have a market cap of $645 billion. Chinese companies listed 150 billion the last 7 years, and the cumulative market cap of European internet companies is 7 billion, of which 4 is mail.au. So meaning we don't have exit markets. And to bore you a little bit more with numbers, the average financing rounds that VCs give to little startups. So in China, the average A round was $10 million. In the US, it was 7.5, and in Europe, 2.94. What does it mean? Every entrepreneur, per default, gets less money to experiment with. If he wants to have the same money, which he might need to be as competitive as the others, his cap table is ruined. So these are the structural disadvantages that we have in Europe. So that's why I would rather phrase the question, how can UK create the innovator. I think it is more the questions, how can we Europeans organize us in a way that we create it? Because I think it is worse than we ever think, because what we have done, it's a great industry. It creates hundreds of billion of market cap the next years, and we just exported it. Yeah, we created companies in markets and hope that Google or others buy us. So gone the innovation is, dominated by US decision makers, and that's how we export our talent and our innovation. So I think it's really a critical thing for us Europeans here to be aware that we have to keep this innovation and this industry also a little bit in Europe.
And just to take a bit further, because of your experience particularly, you mentioned the beginning of funding second round entrepreneurs and the problems with finance. Do you see any sign that that's improving, or is there anything that you think we and others can do to improve the situation in Europe?
I think luckily greed helps a little bit. With Spotify having become big, with Skype having become big, US companies are seriously looking into Europe. So with a Kleiner Perkins investing in Turkey, so that tells a lot. So meaning that the US funds have discovered Europe, which is good on the one hand. On the other hand, it's still another dependency on the US. So I think it is slowly but surely infiltrating everything, and it is very difficult to keep it. I would wish that we had a little bit more of instruments that we could keep the whole ecosystem in Europe.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, you mentioned a lot there, and I hope to come to more of that again in a second. One of the things you mentioned, though, was hubs. So, it's not necessarily about countries, it's about people coming together, and you're all about hubs. So what is that going on down at Silicon Valley?
What is going on there? Okay. What we're trying to do is to attract, more Klauses, I guess, if I have to say. One of the things that we would like to see is more investment, more people prepared to look at the kind of companies that you look at the stage that you look at, and take that risk to invest in them. And if you ask the reason, I think the question was, why don't we have them, and what can we do? At government level, there's very little you can do other than be a terrific cheerleader. In fact, you don't really want government doing much else. What you do want, though, is you want government to set great policies to attract investors. And so we've recently done something called the SEED Enterprise Investment Scheme, which is an extraordinarily generous tax break for UK taxpayers, which will come in at the beginning of April, which will mean that over 50% of your investment, up to £100,000, will be able to be offset against your tax bill in that year. And all investments made in that year will be free of capital gains tax. Do you know, I love your reaction. Can you do that again? That was great. And you didn't know that. It's a very new thing that's just come out.
Yeah, the Germans do that as well with sectors like coal and shipbuilding.
Thank you.
Are you more or less likely to invest in the East End of London as a result of that, Klaus, do you think?
Well, I don't see there's a direct correlation. Yeah. So the thing is, it is an initiative which makes sense, which is led by a serial entrepreneur, which guarantees a minimum level of professionalism. So that's all good. And I think that's exactly the signs that we are seeing all over the place, that the ecosystem improves.
And actually, on the professionalism side of it, I wanted to dwell on that. One of the reasons that I think that we haven't had those giants is because I don't think we really have had in recent years an ecosystem that we could genuinely, hand on heart, say could support a company that was doing that kind of trajectory. Very few companies in the UK have succeeded to do that. Notable exceptions are companies like Arm and Autonomy. I mean, and the companies that you invested in, of course. But Autonomy took quite a long time to get to a 10 billion exit.
Yep.
But now...
But it's B2B.
It is B2B.
B2B, yeah. You have way higher chances to achieve that. B2C, scalable businesses, it's very difficult.
It is. But the one exciting thing about the ecosystem now and what is happening in TechCity is that we are seeing these serial entrepreneurs, people who did kind of okay in their first company, that are maybe doing a bit of mentoring, but actually really understand the rules. And then they're seeing the signals, because people behave in the way that their environment tells them is okay to behave, don't they? So now we have a couple of those exits, and companies of the type that you've invested in, which use London as part of their growth strategy, I think that we're moving towards a time where we send a signal to entrepreneurs that we will let you keep the first, 90% of the first £10 million capital gain. We send a signal to entrepreneurs and to investors that we will give you a very big tax break for that seed highest risk investment. And there's other policy changes that we put in place. But to have all of that very supportive business environment, but then within an ecosystem that can support those high growth companies is incredibly important. Can I just say that we are amazingly pleased to thank Google for doing something extraordinary in TechCity that really is pioneering for you too, isn't it? So can we discuss that a little bit, because I think it's quite interesting.
I'm not really supposed to talk about it.
Okay, well I will.
No, but basically what we have done, first time anywhere in the world actually, is we've taken a building which we're going to be encouraging startups to come and work in and work with our engineers and teams to try to see if we can help to stimulate.
So you know what that means? Within London, which has a terrific advertising industry, it means that our ad tech companies can innovate and have a chat with people at Google about how might this work with you guys without having to fly to Silicon Valley.
Can we just explore, though, just to get it off Google and back to what you're doing, can we just explore a bit about what it's like? Why is it so important to be next to each other? This sort of co-location that's going on in Silicon Valley, and Klaus also alluded to it. Perhaps we'll go from there to other centres where we're seeing it happening. What makes it work when people are located together? In this world where everybody's connected all the time, why does it matter?
Great question. We were talking a little bit about this earlier. The thing that a good investor does is he or she makes connections for their investees to the people and companies and supporters and ecosystem that they need in order to succeed or not fail, not make mistakes, and to grow, right? That's what they do. What you have within London as an ecosystem is an ecosystem that supports each other. Every night there are meetups or events or hackathons or investor events. Every night there's something in TechCity. It's almost effortless. You walk through it and you can see it happening by osmosis. And you can find sectorially strong areas. So, for example, if you're a product company, you would go to Tech Hub. In your fashion, you go somewhere else. And so there are thematic support networks that you can identify that are exactly right for you, that will help you find people you want to employ, people you want to contract with, people you want to pilot with, companies that you want to experiment with, that will help you succeed faster, make less mistakes. The evidence of this is starting to shine through. We know of some terrific investments by those Silicon Valley investors who've come over and made some investments in TechCity companies. I can't tell you who they are. I'm not allowed to, but they have done that. Some of them we can talk about in London are companies, organizations like I think we mentioned Kleij Perkins, who made that incredible investment in Shazam and said, and we're going to leave the headquarters in London. Why? Because this can grow in London. That kind of thing sends a really strong signal to our own investors. And we were so delighted when people like Index Ventures put an office in TechCity. So I think it is because the ecosystem can now support us.
And is that what you see elsewhere, Klaus? Where are the other centres that you think are interesting at the moment?
So Stockholm, clearly. I think Stockholm has produced the most billion-dollar companies out of Europe, and Berlin. Berlin has changed the last 2 years amazingly. So it is the average wage there is $38,000 compared to 58 here. Every quarter you have like 8,000 people between 25 and 35 that move there. Out of these 8,000, you have like 3,500 not coming from Germany, international crowd. So you have Spanish people coming to Berlin to make a startup for Spain. So in order to take advantage of these hub functions. So I think there we prepare a little bit, but I'm still stay worried about the financing situation. Because just to give you an idea what it means like there are probably like 1,000 portfolio companies in VC portfolios, and if they are lucky, 10 are basically picked up by the Googles, Facebooks of the world, meaning you have 990 companies there waiting for an exit. And if this stays like this, then you don't recycle the money. So if they don't recycle the money, the fund of funds don't give the VCs the money anymore. And so at some point in time, the system doesn't work anymore. So exits is really, really powerful, and it is very difficult to get something either listed or or sold, because it's way easier for a US company to buy a US company. It's the same DNA.
So, Klaus, what would need to change for the exit market in Europe to improve? What would need to be different?
I think the first thing we need to do is think different in a way of scale. So the last two models we have done is we have taken one business model and have rolled it out in parallel in Australia, Arabian Emirates, India, Turkey, Brazil, Mexico, and for sentimental reasons, Switzerland, because I'm living there. Talk about big markets. So, but in this case, what you achieve is you have a same or a bigger addressable markets than the US has it, and you come to marginal cost structures that are comparable. And only if you have this, then you can dare to list. Yeah, to give you an idea, a listing cost on a Nasdaq is probably like $5, $6, $7 million a year. If you say I get a 20 price earning, you need 140 million market cap to sustain the listing costs. Right. So there's you really have to be big in order to list. So and just going to the AIM or to Freiverkehr in Germany doesn't really serve the same purpose. You have an illiquid stock, and the disadvantages are at least as many as the advantages.
A lot of what you're saying of barriers really comes down to this idea of scale, doesn't it? Whether it's the exit market, the finance market, or the ambition of the business,
yep.
Going from a local company to being a global company and being in multiple markets very quickly.
Yes.
Is that what you've been looking for in the companies you've been investing
Yes,
in?
I think it would be great if there would be common initiatives on certain investment themes. What I mean by that is if the French, the German, and the UK entrepreneurs would hook up and say, we do one Just Eat. Mm-hmm. Yeah? Because then this quickly gets support of the best ones, it gets elevated up, and then it has that scale. But instead, the French do 3, the Germans do 6, here they do 3. So meaning that there's no point in time you have one company that can scale. And on the other side, you have 6 VCs that lose their money, instead one that makes the money. So still this heterogeneity of Europe is slowing down the whole exercise pretty much.
And Eric, you've got a long experience, 25 years as a tech entrepreneur in many different forms. What's your view on that? Is that something that we can overcome in Europe?
I think it is. And it is interesting because governments compete, but entrepreneurs collaborate. And they could collaborate more. So I think that...
When was the last time you collaborated with a French entrepreneur?
Well, the last time I collaborated with a French former entrepreneur was when we spoke at Le Web in December, because we had to agree what we were going to say.
Okay.
You will enjoy what we say. And actually, I'll mention it. It was the morning after David Cameron exercised his veto, so it was quite an exciting moment. What I will say, what we agreed is to try an idea, which I'm happy to share with you. We're quite keen to do this, which is something called GEN, Global Entrepreneur Network. And that means that as a government, we encourage 5 entrepreneurs from each major hub across Europe who are experts in their thematic expert area to actually collaborate. And we just simply are convening them to meet so that, for example, when a US venture-backed company in the space wants to land into Europe, they say, oh, it's hard, so many languages. There will be a more effortless, more frictionless network. So that when somebody is about to invest in a Let's Eat or whatever, a Just Eat, they will talk to each other and say, oh, did you know? And maybe those connections might actually encourage this coalition that might take place. I use a word for it called co-opetition. I get told off for making up words, but I quite like that one because it describes the sentiment that it might work.
Klaus, I don't know whether I'm misreading your face. You look to me slightly sceptical about some of those ideas.
We have to argue about something.
Is there a role for government really to stimulate this and do this kind of stuff, or is it more about just encouraging entrepreneurs to think bigger?
These tax breaks make a lot of sense. Right. I mean, whole Eastern Germany has been built by that, and it encouraged all the dentists in Europe, in Germany, to invest in Eastern Europe real estate. So, I mean, obviously, it can move money into some directions, these initiatives. I think if it happens on that level, it's fine, because then at the end, the entrepreneurs are among themselves. Yeah. There have been programs where the KfW, which is a German state bank, has certain programs, but they have been very rigid, and at the end they have rather been misplayed than being efficient. So if it is on the level that the taxpayers are incentivized to allocate money, then the banks will probably collect this money in no time and will fuel venture funds. So because the overall money that is available is little.
So I guess a final question.
Just to say what I mean with little. So in Silicon Valley, the venture capital per capita is $1,800. In Israel, the venture capital per capita is $150. In Europe, it's 10. Yeah, so that's what I mean with how much is it. And at the same time, Germany spends 50 billion on innovation, which goes to Fraunhofer Institute, to Leibniz Institute, so to a total different way of innovation.
Again, it comes back to your first point on scale, I guess. I wanted to end with a final question for both of you, which I think I've now forgotten. Here it was. If people in this room wanted to help the odds of creating successful European innovation web businesses, what could they do in their large companies? Or you just encourage them to leave and go and start things in Silicon Roundabout? What could people with the skills that this group have got do to help?
Well, I think sometimes UK is really good against Germany. So when I was with Benchmark, you still had people with 45, 55 coming in and wanted to start something new. Right. Yeah, that I really admired. I hadn't seen that. So my point is just open the radar to being an entrepreneur and then do it in the field where you have your passion. If you do it in the field where you have your passion, then you are seamlessly good. You don't need to excel, so it comes all natural. So just dare a little bit more to do something in the field that you love.
Sounds like good advice. Eric?
Well, for the major industries within the UK, the message is don't crush the latent innovation that you have within your organizations. Some of your people are absolutely inspiring new ideas and new innovation. And if you don't have that, if you see your organization and it doesn't have that culture of innovation, look for startups to help feed that, to see what they can bring, make it possible for startups to engage. Some of you in the room are actually putting together programs to do that. And that kind of approach, which is really changing the traditional corporate thinking, will help prevent you from being, well, a Kodak, I guess, and help you to stay a Google.